Of course, yes.
He has renewed his passion for history. To study the Moravians, he has traveled to 4 different states, and to Canada and Europe to see other Moravian settlements. He and his wife, Myra, have visited several Moravian museums and have taken 2 seminars of Moravian history and theology. Don has personally interviewed several Moravian pastors and professors. Don grew up in Mount Clemens, flew B-24 bombers in the Army Air Force in World War II. He graduated from Wayne State University and has a graduate degree from GIA Southern California. He was the owner of several jewelry stores and an advertising publishing business. His love of history contributed to his belonging to more than a dozen historical associations. He has written articles on local history and collaborated in producing 5 historical documentaries. The Clinton Public Library, right here, has designated and named the Donald W. Green Local History Room. Don and his wife, Myra, married 63 years, live in Clinton Township. They have 3 sons, 5 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. So this is Don Green.
Thank you, Jim. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
If you can't hear me, raise your hand and I'll try to adjust what I have to, because I sit where you are sometimes and there's nothing more annoying to have a person up there say, I'm sure they can all hear me, and they can't hear them, and no one says it. So I don't take it as a gripe, I take it as a compliment that you want to hear me. So put your hand up about not being heard right. My hearing aid is falling. That's the only thing falling off for me. You'll have to forgive me how I maneuver around here. It's obvious I came to even stand upright nowadays. And sometimes I'm going to be sitting down here because I have to put the laser beam on to show something is being pictured. Other times I'll sit down and face you so you can look at me. Before I get started in the talk, I want to give a couple of acknowledgments, appreciation. One is to my cohort who put the screens together, put the video part together. I know how to use a computer. I thought I knew a little bit about it, but it's so much fun when you got a lot of work to do and somebody really knows where they're going on the computer, and she does. Eva Hartford. And I also would like to pay a special acknowledgement. I don't know if Richard Squire is here. I told him he was going to come. And another one special to Nancy. Hank, where are you, Nancy? Right here. These 2 people live up in the Moravian Village area up on Moxon Drive. And their own personal efforts and interest in the history of the Moravians and preserving the site is greatly appreciated by all of us that are historians. It's wonderful. In the case of Nancy, her parents did a lot of work on preserving the Moravian site up there. It takes people who are interested in history and willing to stand up for it to keep history moving. Nancy, thank you very much for what you've done in the past and for your And I want to pay a special privilege to my girlfriend for 63 years, Myra. I get carried away with my history work sometimes, and I've got a library up and stuff. I'm always writing and always reading and everything else. So I got to have somebody to do the dishes occasionally. Do the cooking. Appreciate it here. Talking about the Moravians is a fascinating thing because it's a fascinating subject. I have in my own library over 30 books just dealing with the Moravians, and there are a lot more. So it's not a case where it's a subject that's not known about generally by historians and other people. It's well known, the story of Moravians. And constantly people come to me, and knowing that I've done some research and study of Moravians, not only in the Moravian settlement we have here, but around the world. And they have questions concerning Moravians. I'm mostly interested in how that they all come up and they think that the Moravians as a group probably are some quirks of some kind. They're unusual, they do things differently, you know, and that seems like the moniker that they carry all the time. Maybe that's why I right there. Can you hear me? The Moravians actually that is not their name. That's a nickname that was placed onto them by Count von Clinton, who was interested in the Moravians. He did a lot. The real name is United Fraternal, United Brothers, and that's the name of the church that they have. The nickname Moravian was given because the majority of the people started the religious organization are from Czech Republic and the Moravian province of Moravia, also Bohemia, and also in the Silesia area of Poland, and also in Saxony area of Germany, where Dresden is the capital. That whole core area is where people that became Moravians resided. And that's, they said, Count von Zimmendorf, who was a German, a major count in the German hierarchy, and helped the Moravians a lot. He helped establish 2 or 3 communities on his property and allowed the people to stay there where they wouldn't be subject to some of the tyrannies and some of the anguish they had when they were other places. There was a great rift in the early part of the 13th century, 14th century, and the church in Rome was all powerful, all dogmatic, as they have been at times. And they really were laying heavy on the people, and there were minor uprisings around the country in Western Europe, people who didn't know if they really wanted to stay in the Church of Rome. A few of them stood up and started to move away from it. One was a man by the name of John Huss. Sure way to keep a movement alive is to martyr the leaders. That's the surest way to do it. And that's what happened exactly here. They martyred John Huss, and the whole movement went underground for a number of years, in fact, for a couple centuries. And they were protected by people, royal families, and some political leaders who believed in what they were doing. I wondered how important John Huss really was to the people of Czechoslovakia. And it just turned out that the father of my daughter-in-law and his wife were born in the Czech Republic. He spent many years growing up there. I called him up. Paul was the father. Paul. I called Paul up and I said, "Do you know John Huss or know about John Huss?" He said, "Absolutely." I said, "What do you know about him?" He said, "Well, he's a hero in Czechoslovakia. In fact, we have a holy day or a regular national holiday. It's John Huss Day. And we especially put programs on for it. And we have John Huss lessons in school. We have a book we have to. So after all those years, John Huss is still a well-known person. If you Google him up, you find quite a few articles about it. Yet he's relatively unknown around here. But he is very important, particularly in the Czech Republic and in Europe. The followers of John Huss had a great difficulty time getting together on things because they were always at wit's end with the church in Rome. There was a lot of pressure, both physically, financially, and otherwise that was going on. And so they were looking for a place where they might have peace and do things. And up stepped a man called Sinsendorf, Count Sinsendorf. And, he was also a very brilliant man. He trained in law, he trained in...
Want to sit down?
He trained in law, he trained in theology, and he was one of the richest men in Europe. He had a lot of property in Saxony. And because of that, he said he would help support them, and they would put together some property that he could build villages on. The one that we're mostly interested in is still there. When I went back a couple times years ago, 10, 15 years ago, it's called Herndorf. It's very close to the Polish border, but it's in Germany, the Saxony province. Von Steffendorf was a prominent Lutheran theologian. And this is an interesting thing because a lot of people will say, what does the Moravian religion believe in? Well, they believe in some of the same things. When it first started out as a sect. And a lot of people still say it's some sort of a religious sect. That's not true. A sect, by definition, is an aggregated bunch of people with what the traditional powers are doing, whether it's a political party or a religious party, but they are a minority that they're trying to get rid of all the time. When you grow up, you're no longer a sect, you're a religious church or you're a political party. So it is the case of the Moravian. The Moravian religion today is followed by anywhere between 1.5 million and 2 million people in the world. And they do work in a lot of different places. They have an organizational platform, just like a lot of other churches do. It's recognized by the United Churches, Council of Churches, as a full-blood church. And the interesting thing about the Moravians is a lot of people belong to the Moravian church, but they also belong to another church. And the reason for that is the Moravians never were really hard-pressed to say, you got to believe this, you got to believe that type of thing, you got to do it our way. They want people to work together, to be religious together, but they could belong to another church if they wanted to. And it sounds like an incongruity, but the closest thing I could think to it, and they probably kick me in the heels if I said it to them, is it reminds me a little bit of the Salvation Army.
Or the Freemasons?
What?
Or the Freemasons?
Yes. They can be of different religions, and that's the church that they belong to, the church they go to.
That's what they
But they all still believe in the general good of the people, and what has to be done. In this case, the Moravians, their biggest object going forward was the fact that they were believed in helping other people in different countries and different places to upgrade themselves, to learn more how to get along, to survive, and so on. They were missionaries. And so the Moravian Church raised a crop of missionaries that was bigger than any consider their size. So it was that when the Moravians got organized and they had groups going out, they sent a group logically to the United States, which was at that time was not the United States, it was part of the British Empire, it was the colonies. And they settled first in South Carolina, that didn't work out with Charles Savannah or other. And then they tried a little bit later in a couple other communities that didn't work out very well. Finally, they had a settlement in, if you go down to Salem, North Carolina, Winston-Salem, it's the two cities that are combined together. The Salem part is all a Moravian town, Moravian village town. And it's a really fun place to go to look at. I mean, you see how people live there, the cooking and everything else. They have their own religious services. You belong to the Moravian Church if you're there, and you're part of it. But in the city, you could belong to the Moravian Church and also belong to the Presbyterian Church if you wanted to. Or in the case of Von Siffendorf, he belonged to the Lutheran Church all his life, and yet he was the biggest benefactor of the Moravian group. He didn't find anything unusual about it, nor did the others. The Moravians, when they settle in a community and they don't have a good church mechanism going there for Protestant churches, they will establish a church. But if they find out that the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists, or particularly the Methodists, are doing something or doing a good job, they say, well, they do it. We'll join you too. And so they will still continue their joint endeavors with their missionary zeal and belonging to a church. I hope that sheds a little light on the Moravian philosophy. I have copies of their book of worship, and so when I've gone through them, and they're some of the most logical, practical books you've ever read about doing the right thing in life, and doing the right thing for your God, your beliefs in Christianity, and so on. They're just total Christian films. But they do have some peculiar quirks. They don't do it so much now, but they used to do it. They would make choices by lot. And if they couldn't make their decision up, there's a group of the church wants to do it this way, another group wants to do it that way. They can't get their minds working together on it. Then they'll draw on it and see who goes which way. And that binds them all. And so surprisingly, it works. I think we probably had Congress a little bit, right? Sometimes you got to give. Somebody's going to win. Sometimes somebody isn't. But that brought a lot, and that happened oftentimes in their marriages. They have so many males and so many females that have to be spliced. So they'd say, "All right, we're going to have a hitching day, so to speak." And all the women and all the females and all the men that were unmarried would be given straws or paper, whatever it was, and they draw by lot. For the end of the day, you had a husband or a wife. That's, we're right here, most of us are older, I think. I can see a few gray hairs around here. And I think when we get older, we look at these things, you can see maybe that isn't so bad. Like people that went out west, they had to take a bride with them or so on. They made it work. That was, you get married to make it work. It's love that sometimes love blossoms as it goes along. It doesn't blossom right away. But this is what the Moravians would do. They have by lot. They also were great believers in song and singing. And most people know the Moravians because they know that they always have these song fests. And a great group for singing. And they also are a great group for education. When they got to the United States, the sixth oldest college in the United States is the Moravian Church in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, the sixth oldest. And it was one of the first ones to admit women to the college. They believed the equality between the men and women in all things. And I don't know how far that goes, but like a lot of utopian type of settlements that we had from Central Europe during the 17th, 18th, 19th century, groups that would come over from a certain area in Europe, they would create a town, and some people would have special skills. They would say, "You're the bakers. You people are the carpenters. You people are the seamstress," and so on. There'd be a division of duty and labor to make the whole thing work. And the Moravians, when they went to these communities, they would do this. Another thing that they would do some they had what they called love fish. And when you first hear about it, you think, well, what's all this about? They would have a service, and they announced that the service that they're going to have on whatever date it's going to be, whether it's Sunday or it's going to end with a love fest. And that meant that you would do it in your churches sometimes. Everybody has potluck. Well, they had potluck with cookies and tea, things of that, different drinks. And at the end of the service, they would shake hands with people. They would give a hug. They talk to each other. They talk how much they like each other and how much they want to get together. They just want to share with each other. And before long, everybody, and not in the sex way that you think about, but they would be hugging and putting their arms around each other and sitting down and singing songs. And everybody would go away from these gatherings in a spirit of high spirit and a spirit of love with all the people in the community. These are the love fish. And they settled a lot of nasty problems that they had because they weren't, all the people in the community could be nice to you, you could be nice to all the people in the community too. I think it's another beautiful thing. So that the Moravians had some ideas that they thrust out to the public, and some people grabbed at it. They said they were a bunch of queer lots. Well, they aren't. They really aren't. They're very solid people in their community, and they did a lot of wonderful things. All the people that went out as missionaries did so out of their own pocket. And they might be broke when they began, but they were educated people. They weren't people who just came from the streets. Practically all the missionaries that they had were college graduates or similar to it. And then all the problems of paying the bills and sort of things that they had to solve. They didn't do it for profit, for sure, but they didn't feel they had to be financed by some other people. The financing that went on from the head church on the time to help us set up a system screening, to put new buildings up or buy equipment and things like that. So that's the background of the Moravians, the United Stratum. I like it when somebody reminds me that I shouldn't say Moravian, I shouldn't say United Stratum, United Brothers. And they came to, as I said before, they came to the United States when they were in the colonies, and they established themselves in different places. They were known for the good work they were doing, and they were pretty well respected. They dealt mostly with the Indians, and by the way, I will use the word Indian, and it's perfectly proper nowadays. I understand that we've got to shift again. You don't have to say Native American. I asked my good friend who was a Moravian over in Canada, Daryl Stonefish. I said, Daryl, I got to give talks now, and I don't know whether to say Indian or not. He said, why? I said, I understand that's a no-no. He said, that's what we call ourselves. He said, we're all Indians. So I said, fine, so I'll use the word Indians. And anyway, when they were working with the Indians, these people, the ones that, let me back up, the ones that they first started working with were the Delaware, and they were the principal tribe that they worked with all the time. I've been doing a little bit of reading on the Native Americans or the Indians, and there are so many different tribes, and there are so many different groups and speaking groups. It's hard to separate. It's hard for me to believe that there could be that many. But the Delawares were part of the Lenape tribes, which was a bigger group of Indians all throughout North America, the Lenapes. And the chief language of the Delawares and most of the Lenapes was the Algonquin, which was the language, the mother language of all of them. The Delawares were the tribe that met the first settlers that came to the United States on Long Island. There were a lot of Delawares there. They said they were Lenapes, but because they were close to the Delaware River, one of the governors there, his name was Delaware, and so they said these are the Indians that live in the Delaware, which was corrupted later onto the Delaware. These are the Indians that live in the Delaware. So the Delaware tribe are actually Lenape Indians speaking Algonquin, but they are called, this is something I learned too with studying, they were the going to check to our grandfather, or we will talk to our grandfather about this. They don't mean their physical grandfather. They were referring to some of the other tribes, like the Delawares and others. They are the grandfathers. They would settle disputes between different tribes because they were so highly respected. They were generally a cut above the other Indians in the social status and also in background and training. And in this way, the Delawares became very important as an Indian tribe throughout our Indian history in North America. They were also good, quick learners, and they're also people who seem to want to be as willing to work out problems among the Indians and among the white people who came over here to settle. Because there were serious problems, as you all know. This was fomented for a long time. Too many Americans came here, and a perfect solution was to get rid of the Indians. And if we talk about genocide, all we have to do is look in a mirror and say, who were some of the worst people who genocided this world? And we can criticize all we want some of the things that happened. They were bastard things that happened around the world, genocide. But we did a pretty good job of it here in North America. And we should carry that blame and that shame all the time. And this is something that the Moravians recognized right off the bat. The Moravians could see that this was wrong. And believe it or not, in your readings or my readings on it, the ones that created most of the genocide were not the French. The French got along pretty good with the native people. They like to live that kind of life, and they would be very good with them. And the British got along quite well. They had a different way of government with the native people. They wanted it done the British way. The French said you do it the French way, but they both got along. The one that they had the hardest time with the natives, and I found many references to this, the ones that gave it most difficulty were the colonists. The ones that were over here, and they were going to own the country, and they were going to own one way or another. The genocide way, that was it. They didn't say genocide, they just kept taking a little more country away from it, a little more new treaty, new territory, and then they would cut it up a little bit more and make it smaller and give them less and less. And that's what caused all the problems in between the Indians and the colonists over here, was the fact that the Indians saw something that they realized that the country was being taken away from them gradually and sometimes in big grabs. And that's why they fought so hard, and that's why they were so cool in their methods of dealing with it themselves, because we were doing us, and then you have to read the history of it. And that's why one of the nice things about history is start to rethink some of these things again and say, well, we weren't always right, really. And you have to accept some of the responsibilities for what happened before. This is what the Moravians, when they were going through these settlements and setting up these new towns, they would establish a teaching system. Moravians were great ones for believing in teaching. In fact, one of the Moravian founders of the teaching system, Americus, my name is, you can always name the people who aren't teaching in the founded school for their education. We will hear the name Americus. And that's not Camara, Mark, that's Americus, the Moravian, who was the first big teacher. He was the one that started having picture books for kids. He was the one that wanted to teach women how to read. He didn't believe that women were sub-level teaching. Tell that to them today when they get more college degrees, pass it for women in a minute. And so the Moravians followed through on all this, and they were great teachers. They would, and some of their tribes, like the one that we want to talk most of them on, his name is, This is David Seisberger.
fixate that in your mind, and sometimes it's kind of hard, but that's sort of halfway between when Benjamin Franklin and George Washington were born. George was a little younger, and Franklin was a little older, so he's right between that. So you get a time frame where he fit into his group. Came from a modest family, but he showed great brilliance as a young boy, learning things, and so they helped send him away to private schools as much as he could. And he got a good college education and became a college graduate. And in fact, he graduated from college in England at the time, which shows that there was some substance behind it. The parents have said had no great sum of money, but because even the neighbors recognized that David was quite a bright guy, that they would chip in and pay for it. We hear about high cost of college nowadays for children and their family members having to chip in to put Peter through school or something. That we've gone through those too. But even in those old days, they were doing the same thing. And I thought it was interesting when I reading the story about David Seisberger and getting his schooling, that the neighbors helped, relatives helped pay some of it. It wasn't just the parents, felt that he had a talent and should go to school for it. Well, he graduated and he was ordained, which goes back to what I said, he was ordained by the Church of England. And he always had this membership in the Church of England, but he became a Mormon because he didn't see any compatibility there at all. And when he was ordained, so he had church services as a Mormon, and he taught the people in the way the Mormons would. The sermons would be that way, the liturgy would be that way as a Mormon. But he still personally could do certain things. He actually sometimes married people under the Church of England, or sometimes he married as a Mormon, as he was, which way he wanted. And David Seisberger came over to this country, and he was right at the beginning a hard worker within the Mormon Church of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania is sort of the North American headquarters for the Mormon religion. And they keep all the records of the Mormon College is in Bethlehem. They had a big community there, with a lot of residency there. People would go back there to retire. They went out and settled. Sometimes they'd go back to Bethlehem. It's an interesting community. If you ever get a chance and you're in eastern Pennsylvania, take the time to go. Have you ever been to Bethlehem? It's an interesting town, isn't it? They're doing a lot of rebuilding in Bethlehem and refurbishing of the old office of old buildings and so on. But Bethlehem was typical of those Mormon towns. When Myra and I went to Bethlehem to take a couple ceremonies, we ate at one of the nicer restaurant hotels there. It was on the edge of the downtown area, and we were told that the Mormons built this hotel years ago because if anybody was visiting Bethlehem and they were not a Mormon, they couldn't stay overnight in Bethlehem. They had to stay someplace else. So they built a hotel on the edge of the town. They said, you can get a room out there, but you can't have a room in the city with us because you're not a Mormon.
John, do you mean Moravian or Northern Mormons?
Pardon?
Do you mean Moravians or
Moravian.
Northern?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Misspoke.
I'm sorry,
Well, thank you for correcting.
Historian.
Yeah. The Moravians would build these places to stay in. And when we had our own settlement here in Clinton Township, they would, in my readings of it, they would often take guests who wanted to come up and see the Moravian village, mountain group, and they would tell them to stay out.
Can you speak a little louder?
Okay, yes, thank you. They would tell them to stay at this one place, a camp or a tent or something, outside of the settlement because they didn't want them to corrupt the natives that they had there. They felt just by living with this rough, shoddy crowd sometimes it came in to be a corrupting influence on them. There's no sense of bringing them to stay overnight in your house. So they would tell them that they could stay someplace and have this picture tent or put these settlements in different places in the new colonies. And most of them were fairly successful, although they were getting completely troubled by the problems that they were having with the Native Americans, the Indians, who were very upset because they could see their land being taken away from them. During the Revolutionary War, just prior to it, David Zeisberger established 3 or 4 settlements in Ohio, and they were really good. They were down around New Philadelphia, Ohio, and Goshen, Dover, and these places were really out in the boondocks. They were out in the wooded areas, and they established and they became self-sufficient communities. They were so good at building these self-sufficient communities that people would come from away and far just to see how they operated. They were very efficient. The crops were coming in and taking care of it, the husbandry of the meat and the animals, and it was very good. In general, the whole thing was run right. The Moravians did something also about looking this up with the Indians. They allowed that they didn't have to push down on the Indians all the time. There were some things that they knew they grew up learning as Indians in their family life and so on. And as long as it wasn't totally incompatible with how they, as Moravians did or as Western Europeans did, that's the way you want to live, that's the kind of life you have, fine, we accept that, we can accept that. There were certain things though that if you, like, go over Christianity and their thing that they would say, you gotta respect us, you can't run around with 10 women. You gotta take care of your children, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. They had a good break with people. I think there were about 16 different things that all the Indians had to do. They had to, reading David Zeisberger's diaries, this is something you might wonder where a lot of this information comes that gets very close to the it's all the missionaries that went out, part of the rules that they had to follow themselves, they had to keep a daily journal or diary. And that was one that it wasn't something for fun, it was something that they were required to do. And then these diaries were all sent back after we went out to the main headquarters, which in case of North America was Delaware, was a Bethlehem. And they would send them to Bethlehem, and they would put record here, they would go over, they'd find out what was being done, how it was being managed, and everything else. And the missionaries that went out in the field, so to speak, had a lot of latitude in how they did things, but they still had a framework of what they had to organize and do it by. And then they would send these diaries back. They were fun to read. Most of the stuff, information I got, a lot of the information I got was from reading David Zeisberger's diaries. I couldn't read them, but they got transcribed. They were German. David Zeisberger speaks 4 or 5 different languages. And but he did write his diaries in German. I have to tell this story because it was instrumental in me really wanting to go on and study more about it. When Myra and I were at Bethlehem for the seminar, I took a part of an afternoon off and I went down to the archival museum at the Bethlehem, Moravian Archival Museum. It happened to be a Saturday, the museum, for whatever reason, was closed on Saturday. It was summertime. And I got in and I was very quiet, and the man came down and talked to me and introduced himself, and his name was Frank. Last name was Frank, Dr. Frank. And wanted to know what he could do for me. And I said I was interested in the Moravians, and we told me we had a settlement there in Clinton Township of Moravians, and I wanted to find out more about the religion. I wanted to find out more things about the settlement. And anything he could tell me, I'd be appreciative of. He said, sure. He said, that was Zeisberger's place. I said, yeah, David Zeisberger. I said, we got some things on him. He said, this iron, up this line, up this deep. It's all metal. Carried it, it was obviously pretty heavy, I could tell by the way he said it. Set it down on the table and he opened it up and he said, let's take a look. And boy, look at it. There are all these things were put in there. Old journals that they've written over the years were in there. Maps, that we show a map later on, those in there, 2 or 3 maps differently. And he said, these all belong to David Sykes? I said, really? I said, not maybe. He said, no, these are all David's personal things. He came back to us, and we have all the missionaries that went out there. He pulled out this one book, he said, let's see, this was one that's dated out of this, you could read the German very easy. He said, this is one when he was in Clinton Township. I said, it is. Read a passage. He said, out and said, well, the handwriting was good. He said, started reading the dates. Talked about the Huron River, which Flint River was called at that time. Talked about that. He said, here, you take a reader. And when he handed that diary to me, he put it in my head. The hair in the back of my neck just started to stand straight up. I just couldn't believe it. I had David Zeisberger's own handwritten book in my hands right there. Reading it. What a feeling that was. I got so charged up. It was really something. Dr. Frank was nice as we went through all this stuff. And I said, can I have copies of some of these pages and some of that? He said, sure, we're glad to make it for you. We're glad to serve people like that. So much of the material I've got, finally 2 or 3 people, Zeisberger's diaries, were so important. He made so many observations on Indian life in the United States. What things were really cool observations on things. So there were many stories written that used his material as background because he was quite an intelligent man. He did a lot of writing on ornithology, too, and Indian languages. He was quite a linguist in this thing. So we were very interested in everything that we could get our hands on from Zeisberger. And that one book that you see up there, it's that some significant things. He's up there right there. Yeah. That one had to come with Earl Homestead's name on it.
Yeah, it didn't add on there yet.
You had to crop it off.
Yeah.
Earl Homestead is a real thorn on the Moravians. He's written several texts on this. He passed away a few years ago. Meyer and I went down to visit with him 2 times, wasn't it? And it's so quaint to read those things and to study them because you know you're getting information not 3rd or 4th hand. When I talk about sometimes some people, they will say something about it, and I say, well, I might not say it too, but that's not quite right. They read an article that was written by another person that wrote an article, and it's just like that game we play where you sit down with a bunch of people and you whisper a secret into their ear, and they were supposed to next to by the time goes around, gets back to you, can't even remember what the real thing was. And I have a lot of people say, well, I read this, I read that type of thing. And I say, well, it might be correct, but how does that click with what the original is? And I go back to David Zeisberger's diary to find out what the original is all the time, and he was pretty accurate about what he was talking about. And I would go by what he said was the Indians were doing and what they were doing. David had these fairly successful missions in Ohio. I'm going to show you a couple of them. Even if you scroll down and show us Schomburg. Are you on it now?
Yeah.
We have several pictures of Schomburg, Ohio. One of his biggest missions there, or settlements there, was Schomburg, which is outside of Philadelphia, Ohio. And he was there before he came to Michigan and to Clinton Township. He had a thriving, they were really thriving. People would come from far. Unfortunately, those settlements were all located in the area between Philadelphia and Dover and so on, where the route would go from Fort Pitt in Pittsburgh at that time, Fort Pitt, Wheeling, West Virginia, which was Virginia at that time, and then went up to Sandusky, and then went up to Detroit. And that was the trail. If you look, got maps on it, shows that trail. And there was a regular concourse of Indian traffic and colonial traffic and everything that would take that. That was the main route at that time from Fort Pitt all to Detroit. Detroit was an outpost, but Detroit was a more very important outpost for the British, even before they were French. And of course, when the Americans got there, it still was an outpost. It was very important. But when the people were going back and forth and there were belligerents, we were at war, the Revolutionary War was on, and the colonists were not easily appeased. They were pretty roughshod, particularly if they would get over but the Kentuckians were all perfectly rascals. They would get on their, they'd come in, they had their long rifles, and they would go over and take up places. And the colonists tried to stay out of it. They didn't want to get involved in it. They said they're big pacifists. They weren't Marines or pacifists, and they didn't want to get involved in it. And so they had a hands-off policy with both the British and the colonists. But neither of them thought that the colonists thought that the Moravians were being favored by the British, and the British people said they were favoring the colonists. They were telling secrets back and forth on them. And so they got picked on all the time. They got really willfully handled by the troops going both ways. And the British particularly had a nasty little game that they played. And it wasn't very polite. They would give $10 for every scalp that they got. And they would encourage the Indians to go out and come back with as many scalps as you can. It's worth $10 or $5, and they would go out and just like selling popcorn to them. They would go out and they would find a farmer someplace and he would murder the family and scalp the family, and then he'd come back and the officer in charge would come off and say, here's your money. So that they, and it's rife with stories that happen all the time. So it made it very, very difficult for the Moravians to maintain a settlement there and get along peacefully with their tribes. And the Indians themselves started to split up. The Cheyenne and the Negroes and the Wyandots particularly care for the Moravians. And they particularly wasn't much difficulty that when the British said, sick them on to you guys, that they would go down there and get into a lot of trouble, kill a lot of people. This Parks Iceberger had a hard time holding his group together because they wanted to go out, disperse, go out in the woods and forests to live peacefully themselves. But living in a settlement like this, they weren't a big armed camper. They were trying to be civilized as much as possible. They were getting picked off by all these different marauder groups that were going through. Big problem came one time with there was a farmer family not far from Genunda, which was a small town south of. Did you have them on Genunda here for the massacre? Yeah. When they had another settlement down in Genunda, the farmers came down there and really, let me go back. They had a lot of them in Genunda and they were getting into trouble. The people saying that they were taking sides of the British. They wanted to have an answer to the commander in Fort Detroit. And so the commander sent a note down there and said, we want you to sent up David Zeisberger and 3 or 4 others to Fort Detroit. They got an answer for what's going on up here. And so they went to Detroit, and David Kaiser was the Shire Parenting Minister. He was a commander who said, I don't find any problems. I think you are doing the right thing in your data center. I don't see where you're getting into trouble. I apologize for taking you away from it. So when they went back down, going back down to Chinandra, go back to their settlement, they got into some more problems with the Indians who favored it. And the cause of the scatter, there was Captain Pike, which was the name of the Indian leaders. Captain McKee was another one. And they forced the 200 or 300 to disperse. And they had to leave their settlement. They went up in the cold winter, and they went up to central Ohio, their lower Sandusky. And it just literally was terrible. They didn't have enough clothes or food. They were made to walk all the way. They didn't have any proper supplement. They didn't have any housing. It was cold winter. And they were really desperate. They were just literally dying out. This was called the Great Disbursement. And they got up to Sandusky, lower Sandusky, and stayed over the winter there. And then they March, that was, some of the people that were there, they were so starved, they said, we've got to go back down to our homes down.
Can you talk a little louder? Is your mics on?
I don't know where it is.
The right side.
Yeah.
This is upside down.
Okay. All right. Thank you. They,
Yeah.
is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. They talked to David Zeisberger. They said, we're all starving up here. We got to do something. So about 96 of them, 95, 96, said, well, let's go back down to the fields we had down in Chinandra before we came up here. There were still some crops that were corn that wasn't picked, and maize that wasn't picked. There's still some potatoes in the ground and everything. We'll go down there and we'll bring the food back up here so we don't all starve to death. And they went down to Chinandra. 95 is the number that they're usually talking about. While they were there, they were working in the fields peacefully, trying to get all the food out they could that was still salvageable and bring it up. And a group of colonists under Colonel Crawford were scouting around the area because they heard that the Indians had scalped the farm family a few miles away. And they thought that this was the group that was involved in it. Well, these are peace-loving people. They were down here getting food. So the best word you could say, they conned the Indians into believing that everything was right and so on. And they wanted them to come out of the fields and go back into the Chinandra group. And they said they would carry their rifles with them so they didn't have to do it again. Find nice people. So they gave them the rifles that they had, and they went into the Chinandra group. And when they got in there, they turned on them and they said, "Sorry, folks, we want all of you in these 2 cabins." And so they all 95 had to get into 2 small cabins that you can see there on the Chinandra group. Do you have that down there? And when they were in the cabins, they said to them, "Sing your last songs. So you're all going to be leaving this world." And they started to sing, which they loved to do. And then they started to call the natives up, the Indians out, on 2s, husband and wife, a couple children. And when they would come out, they had wood blocks down there. This is true story. They had wood blocks down there, and then we took these big mallets that they would use for stunning cattle. And they just lay it down, and they put their head on the block, and they'd squash your skulls, and take
take the dead bodies and put them in couple of families. 95 people were killed that night. It was the most bloody treatment that anything happened. When stories got out, it was in the New York papers, it was in the Washington papers. Even at a late stage, when Teddy Roosevelt was president, he was talking about something less than maybe even after the court. He referred to the murder of Ambassador Tremendous, who was one of the most dastardly things that ever happened in this country. These men killed all of them except for one boy who was buried himself under the corpse and was able to get away, and another one who was partially scalped, but he survived but not died. So the story got back up to Zeisberger of this mass murder. These were all his friends. These are the people he worked with. All 95 of them killed by a bunch of colonists. Stories have been written about it, and you can refer to the massacre at Chanundahuj. And it's a terrible story. But when the Meister, the commandant, heard about this in Detroit, he's a military man, but he didn't like it either, so he sent down a message to Zeisberger, and he said, come on up to Detroit again, I want to talk more to you. And he came up there, the Meister went up with 3 other missionaries and a couple of Indians. And they went up, and the Meister said, tell me what happened. And he learned what happened. The Meister turned out to be really a great guy. He was well educated. He loved writing and painting, and he had great reverence for people, whether he was good in ministry. And he said, I don't want this to happen. He said, bring your crew up here. You have to run a protection if they want to come. And so they went back down and they brought up those members that would come with them. But in the meantime, a lot of the people in this original group were getting scared. Their lives weren't worth anything, and they didn't know if they went up to Detroit they would be protected or not. So what the common phrase they used, they all went to the bushes, they all hid in the bushes. In other words, they scattered this way and that way. And Meister, Zeisberger got up to Detroit. He had probably about 30 people with him at the time that came up here. And Meister put them up in a place to stay. They fed them, they clothed them, they talked things over. And Meister said, well, you can stay here if you want to. You can go if you want to. We don't have no problems with you. And the major was very frank. He said, I'll do anything you can to help you out. So when finally Zeisberger said, we would like to stay, but we don't know where we could stay. And that was the time that the Meister said, we've got a place, the first place he offered was down around Rocio. He said, but then they changed their mind on that because the Wyandotte Indians down there were not very friendly towards the white people. And they thought that they'd have more problems. Then he moved to another spot, and it was the Mingos that were doing. Finally, he said, I have a good relationship with the Chippewa up on the Huron River area. And I think we can arrange something up there. So they did. They got the chief, and they talked to the chief about it. The chief said they could go up there. There was a piece of land that was owned by a man by the name of Uncle, or Umpy, and he was the Indian agent. He said, you can live on my property as long as you want, no problem at all. So they made the arrangement, and they made the major said, I'll help supply food for you, seeds for you, and you go up to this place on the Huron River. They got together and they went up to the Huron River. There you had brought more natives together. They got 2 boats. The commander had 2 boats. One was his main boat. That was his boat, and for shipping things back and forth. The other was a cargo canoe. And they took those 2 boats. They loaded them up with the people, and they went up on July the 20th. 1782.
This was a raw version, just huge forest over the whole place. They had to have a couple guys because they barely knew where the river was in the Clinton River. And they finally got that far the first night, and they couldn't go any further because it was getting breezy. And they anchored out what I figured from the illustration they had out here in Point. And the next day they got up to the Huron River, Clinton River now. And they went up to Clinton River, and they said that there was, they couldn't move because the wind was too light there, so they had to roll. They had paddles, and they had to paddle up the Clinton River. They complained more and more about the mosquitoes all the time. They said the mosquitoes were just terrible. They couldn't sleep, they couldn't do anything. But they would notice along the Clinton River, in his diary, you can read it, he said we could see that Indians did live in the area, and we didn't want to stop where the Indians were living because that wouldn't be acceptable. They would be taking away some of their hunting grounds. The Indians tried to have settlements 2 miles from each other so that they would disarray the disruptive hunting characteristics. Finally, we found a spot, and they went by the high banks, which we know now, that was the original name of Mount Clemens, high banks. And if you're down in the Clinton River and you look at the county building, yes, it is a high bank. They went by the high banks and they went further upstream, and then they found a spot where the bluffs were, and then the sand bluffs. And they said, this is the place we want to be. And I want Nancy and Hank to read a little article here about, this is coming right from Zeisberger's diary.
And he's describing my yard, actually. The bottoms or lowlands are very rich, but very quickly overgrown with heavy timber. The common kinds of trees are oak, poplar, linden, walnut, ash, hickory, elm, beech, and a great number of sugar trees, by which I think we mean maple, and wild cherry trees, which have a fine red wood, of which in Detroit the most beautiful cabinet work is made, and which is much finer than walnut. And then I have a question for John here, because he says there are asps and sassafras. I never saw an asp in my yard. He might have meant ash or aspen, or I don't know, asp and sassafras. These blasts are of such thickness as we have nowhere seen before, so that boards 2 feet wide could be cut from them.
I particularly like that section out of the diary because it describes the area in the Moravian Drive area. And the fact that you can find there's a shot or two of the woods that are up there right now on Boxing Road. And they have some huge, beautiful trees there. The Arboretum Committee, which I have to be on here, we have a couple of members here. We are putting a native tree arboretum across the street from here, 18 miles away. We've been working on it for the last 4 or 5 years. Some of you might have read about it. And one of the things we want to put in there, we like to plant trees that represent each one of these trees that they found, because this was a huge forest in here. And we would call it our Pioneer Grove. And then we want to get one of these trees. I think Jim Hungerford, how many, you gave the sassafras trees.
Right.
How many sassafras trees do we
I
think?
think you're about 5 now.
Yeah.
Yes, 5.
Yeah. So we've got sassafras, we've got a lot of sugar maple. But if you want to donate something, we'd appreciate it. Yeah, we're buying trees to put out there, and we want to run it together as a Pioneer Grove and say these are the trees that were originally growing here when the first settlement came in. This was absolutely the first settlement, the wood settlement in the state of Michigan. I don't know, the waterway like Detroit is used to be. Read the next passage.
We found many traces that a long time ago an Indian town must have stood at this place, for we saw many holes in the ground, which were now indeed filled up, but quite recognizable, in which the Indians have even now the custom of keeping their corn and other property. You could also quite plainly see the little hills where corn had been planted, but were now as a dense wood of trees, 2 to 6 feet in diameter.
Thanks, Nancy. That, to me, was very incisive as a historian. He's telling us right there, and he's an observer of history, that they've got this huge forest up there that they're looking at. And now they can climb down in the ground like the Indians had, they would call caches. And then they would put corn and things in there. There was a way of keeping things. So if they were coming back through that area at a later night, they knew that they had things stored down there. That this was a popular way that Indians would travel over hunting grounds and stuff like that. So they found these caches that were being used by previous Indians that lived here. And then they found something very interesting, was the fact that they had hillocks for corn. Well, you can't grow corn in a forest. Corn needs a lot of light, a lot of sunshine. And so the Indians would girdle the trees. You know what girdling the tree is? If you cut a circle right around the trunk of the tree, all the way around about 2 inches wide, it'll fill the tree. You don't have to chop it down. They didn't have the means of chopping down all these huge trees. But if they girdle enough trees, it's an old trick, old Indian trick. You can kill the forest right around there and you get plenty of sunshine in there. And that means you can grow your maize and your other crops in there. All right, if you do that, that's fine. But what happened was Zeisberg found that they had these old trees that had girdled, and they had hillocks where they would plant the maize seed. Like they would make a little hill, they plant 3 or 4 kernels of corn in there, the old corn. And they had sunshine, they'd have all these trees come up. But now, Zeisberger said, now I look at it, and they got trees that are 2 and 3 feet thick. So that meant that those original trees that were girdled must have been girdled 200 years before. So that some of these that we found up there, where the old Moravian Hall used to be, there were a couple of trees in back of your house there. It take 2 people to put their arms, 2 or 3 people to put their arms around them. Yeah, and so we now know, this is a little bit of interesting history, we now know that that place was settled and used by Indians maybe 500, 600 years ago, the woodland Indians. It was not, and this goes back into the Paleo Indian period. And Jim Kowalski, where's Jim Sturz? Years ago. We found that axe up there. You found it. I remember you picked it up. Oh, one of them. Yeah. Yeah. And we had that identified as an axe that was probably 7,000 years old, 8,000 years old. So this is why they like staying there. They stayed at a place that everybody wanted to stay. All the original is on this high bluff over the Clinton River, the Huron River, and it was sandy. And so it had good drainage. You want to read these things?
Saturday, 27th. We marked out our town. In the first place, only where 2 rows of houses shall be built, and the street 4 full rods wide, but each lot has 3 rods frontage.
All right, now he's telling us they settled in this place, now they want to settle down and live there. And so they're going to build houses, the cabins. Have you got the, okay. They built the cabins, the log cabins. Zeisberger was not an innovator in a sense. If he built a log cabin, it was a good log cabin in Schoenberg and Shenandoah. He's going to build the same log cabin up here. He's not going to try to have a new style. So the cabins that you see at Schoenberg are the same type of cabins that they were building here. You know, all the lumber there, all the lumber they could possibly want was right there. They lacked good power tools, but they could do with what they've got. Anyway, he's telling us what the streets, what the settlement's going to be. And again, he isn't inventing the wheel. This is about the same way Schoenberg was laid out. And the same way all the other settlements. You have a row of cabins that go down one way on either side of the street. And in the middle you have a meeting house or a chapel. So we have on the layout, do you have the layout there?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's 14 or 14 houses, cabins that go down. Each one, the street is 4 lots wide, which is around 16.5 feet. So that means they're just under 66 feet, the main street wide. And the houses are on a piece of property. He said there are 3 rods wide. Each house was put on 3 rods. So that's a 50-foot lot. So if you've got, you just start doing the mathematics. So if you've got 14 houses on either side, they're 50 feet apart, each lot, how far you're going to carry it down. So we figured that the rough estimate, fairly accurate, would be that it was about the size of 3 football fields long, that it went from one way to the other. And probably going up to about 900 feet type of thing. And in the center part was a chapel on a up here is a street here, and here's where the springs were. They had one of the nice features about this location they had, it was a sandy bluff, high level Clinton River, right across from George Park. And there are 3 or 4 springs, and water comes out, fresh water comes out of it, right out of the side of the bluff. Nancy, you've seen those springs, haven't you?
Oh, yeah,
They're still operating, the springs are still operating. And we went over, we can take it right to the spot and say, that is where they were getting their water. That's the same spot. They're still there. And we took some water out of there, and one fellow that lived there, Richard Spire, over on Belleport, they were in the business of testing water for bacteria and things and other things. And they took a jar of this stuff and tested. I got the analyzing of it. All kinds of minerals in it. It's hard water, but it's good water. But this was the water they got. And down here, right over here, Dr. Frank told me, when we were looking at this map, the seismometer, this is the river. This is just the way it is, and here's where the north branch goes off up here. Looking across the river is where George Park is right now. That's where George Park is. And then the Moravian Road comes down here. And what the Indians did, this is the George Park area, which is across the river. This is where the Indians had they indicated in their diary, the plantations. That's where their fields were. Where they moved it. Over here is where they had fields on this side of the river for the missionaries, and they grew their crops over here. They even had separate places to grow things. These are the names of the different people and the different hamlets that they had, different houses that they had. Down here is the cabin of Richard Connor, all story by itself. Here's the chapel that's in the center. So we got a very good idea where the people lived, and how they lived there. And if you go through the diary, and to shorten it up a lot, they had a lot of guests. Because this was the first inland settlement in the state of Michigan. And people were curious about it. And when you go through the diary, book page after page, listing different days, and they talk about so-and-so visited on this day, so-and-so came up with their friends the other day. They would want to come up and they want to see how people were living out in the forest. This was the other metropolis of Michigan. Detroit was the first one. They had, at one time, they had about 128 people living there, which are more than live there right now. I don't think they have 128 people living in Boxon. And so, actually, it was more populated, and it was a very active community there. You have the picture even if you show the sketch, the line drawing, what it was like. This is one showing, this is a line drawing by an artist that did based on the way it would look down in Sherbrooke. The cabins and the people working up. The natives, a lot of it, you say, doesn't look like a bunch of Indians there. Well, when these Indians became Christianized, when they were baptized, they became Christianized, they no longer became savages, they were Christians now. And when they became Christians, most all of them wanted an Americanized or Englishnized word name. Abraham, Joseph, things like that. They gave up their Indian name and they took on a Christian type name. And they wanted to wear, as much as possible, instead of their native garb, they wanted to wear what they thought was the right dress wear for the Indian group, so to speak. And so it's a very highly stylized painting or drawing sketch there, but it gives you a feeling for what they were. You know, the close-knit group, they had their own fields, they would have for personal things, that they had group fields where they would break up work parties and go down and cultivate the large fields of corn. But then they would have smaller crops that they would have in their backyards type of thing. It's a very self-sufficient organization. They didn't go without trouble there, because they had a lot of guests that would come all the time. They had some that were a little unruly, and you had to lay it down on them. And the Chippewa would come around occasionally, but the Chippewa were not like the Delawares. The Chippewa didn't particularly take to wanting to become Christianized at all, and they didn't want to conform to the way that the Delaware liked living there. So it made for a very nice place, and they were happy, except that the weather turned on them. The winter of 94 was terribly bad. They talked about it in the diaries of others in Detroit at the time. Get these records out, their weather records. And that winter, when the ground was, they said, 5 feet deep. A lot of places the snow for laying on the ground for the whole winter period. They thought they were going to starve to death several times because they didn't have a lot of crops that they'd grown in before. And last minute is kind of a real true story that makes you wonder. They said they were just what their wits had, that they were running out of all their food supply, and a whole herd of deer showed up just on the edge of the settlement, and they were able to kill all but one of the deer, and they had sufficient food for a long period of time. It's nice reading. But they did well by themselves, and they were hoping to stay there all the time. But things changed. The war was won by the Americans, as we all know, and the treaty was signed in 1783, and the Indians heard about, the Chippewa heard about the fact that the war was over between the British and the Americans, and so they kindly told the commander of the fort in Detroit, who had changed by this time, it was the Major Ancron now. They told the major that the Chippewa would like their land back again, the property. Not so much that they needed the land, but they felt that having too many people living there, they were decimating the venison that they could get, and the other foods that they could get. And so they wanted to get that property and the hunting areas back together again. The Chippewa, or the Delaware, and Weisberg would love to have stayed where they were, but they could see the handwriting on the wall. And they had all this investment that they had, time and energy they had put in building these cabins, these cottages, log cabins. And now they had to give it all up again and start all over again, building another one. And where they were going to go, they didn't know. They made all these moves over the last 8 or 10 years. They just went from one place to another like vagabonds. So finally they told the people of Detroit, the major, that they would, in 1786, they said, "You will move out of here." They didn't know really where they were going to go. You didn't have road maps and find out, and go to 3A and find out how things were in some other place. So they thought they would go back down to Ohio for a while and see what happened there. And so they got all together, all their stuff together, and they were able to make a deal between Major Ankrout and John Austin, who was a big investment warehouse type of guy. He had all the trading for the troops and everything. He was great investors, but they said they would buy the improvements on the property from the Moravians. And they paid $450 for the improvements, which was a considerable sum of money in those days. And they divided the money, half went to the Indians and half of it to the missionaries. And the caveat, which is very interesting, that when they left the Detroit area, all the bills that would be paid. And the merchants in Detroit said they never had such good customers as they had from the Moravians and the Indians, because they paid every last cent that was owed them. And it left a very good taste in their mouth. These were our friends. It was said the number of people that would come out from, it's just interesting to read. They had a lot of burials and a lot of weddings. And as far as the burials go, I knew where the burials go. I looked at the original stuff. I could say there's a cemetery up there. But not everybody looked at that. And it happened in 1984. One of the neighbors out there wanted to put a swimming pool in. And they had the swimming pool in the back of their house. You got that one up? You got the skulls there? I don't know how many of you remember that. That was in the paper in Old Daily in 1984. The young men that were out there, they're digging a swimming pool behind the house. They didn't expect to find what they did, but they found the skeletons of a number of people. And there's still the skulls there. The Moravians had a way of burying people in the cemeteries. They had what they called choir groups. Everybody in the Moravian village where you had missionaries would belong to a choir. It would be the single women choir, it would be the married women choir, it would be the bachelor men choir, there was the children's choir, and they would do things as a group. They would sit down and eat together a lot of times as a group. In fact, the children's group would sometimes, at a certain age, would live in their own dormitories and so on. That kind of thing carried on for years in different ways, not today, but when they were buried with their choir, not with their family. So if you go look at the headstone or the tombstones of a bunch of, in the cemetery, you'll find a whole list of women's names, different things. Boy, I didn't think of a family of that thing, but there were women that all were in that particular choir, and then there'd be a bunch of men in a different choir. So when they would go to these cemeteries and they'd bury them, and they never used tombstones. They didn't believe in it. The tombstones to them, they said that once you died and you had to face God, it didn't matter how big your tombstone was, it wasn't going to get you anymore. So they should all be buried with a flat stone on it. So you go to any Moravian cemetery, all they have is a little flat stone on the ground with the name twisted into it. And so when the lady found out these skulls were found out there, I interviewed her. And it was sort of a fascinating thing. I said, well, what happened? She said, well, we were getting our swimming pool dug, and I got a telephone call. She was out of the city area here, and they wanted me to come over right away because we didn't know what to do with it. And she said I couldn't leave then, and so she called her husband up, and he said he would go, and he raced over there. You ever started?
Well, I know it in general.
Yeah. Well, she called Paul up, and she said, go over and see what's happening. By the time he got over to the house, there was a crowd of people over there, newspaper reporters and just onlookers, and I was hoping Richard could be here today, because he's in one of the pictures. And everybody, oh, all these skulls are, how are we gonna do these things? And give us the story of it. Where did they come from? Well, nowadays, laws changed, and if you cover a human bone at any time, it doesn't matter if it's been there for 2 hours or 2 years or 20 years, it's still, you have to call the police department up and report that you found some human bones down there. And they'll decide what's going to be done about it. The law wasn't on the books at that time, in '84. And so the bones were there, and there were a couple guys loading bones into some cardboard boxes and taking them away. And then found out that they were...
Your attention, please, it is 8:30 in the library. We'll be closing in 30 minutes. If you need to get a library card or to check out materials, please go to the information desk on the first floor. And this is also a good time to call home for a ride if you need to. Thank you.
They didn't know what to do with the bones, so one group of professors were from Wayne University. They took them and put them in the car, and off they went with them. I guess Paul was pretty mad about that because the newspaper reporters and everybody was saying what's going on. He got kind of angry. He told everybody to leave. He said, leave those bones alone here. And so I said to his wife, when I was sitting there, I said, what'd you do with them? She said, well, we picked up all the rest of the bones and put them into a couple cardboard boxes and put them on the porch. We didn't know what to do with them. And I said, well, what happened after that? She said, well, somebody came from the Clinton Cemetery and took the boxes and put them in the office out there. So I interviewed the lady that worked in the office, and I said, did you hear when they put the bones there? She said, yes. And I said, well, what'd you do? She said, put them in the corner, or put the 2 boxes right there in the corner. She said, there were skulls and other bones in there, and so I didn't know quite else what to do with it. And I just thought, this is a cemetery, so I'll hold on to it for a while, see what happens. So a little bit later, a year or 2 later, Barbara called up, the lady that owned the house called up, and she said she told the archaeologist at University of Michigan that they could have the bones if they wanted to. So they sent a couple of grad students over with the identification, and they took all the bones down there someplace over in Ann Arbor, I suppose, if they're in the museum there. They got the bones split up. But they got their swimming pool. They didn't know why they had them all in their backyard. Well, Nancy could tell you this because she lived right on the edge of the whole area there. We had other cemeteries that are behind Moravian House. Your mother talked about that. And nobody knows that there's bones back there, but they were finding bones all the time. And they found a lot of bones in other places there, which gets back to full circle about what I talked about history. You start studying these things, you start putting it together. That spot up there where the Indians stayed and the Moravian stayed was an ideal campground building place for a lot of civilizations. And there were a lot of civilizations over several hundred years that lived there. And there are bones from all these different civilizations. It's a nice, interesting lesson to learn that these things that go around come around sometimes. Zeisberger left with his group. They settled in Ohio by Cleveland. They were there for a year or 2, and then they pulled stakes and went to another place in Ohio called Salem, and they stayed there for a little while. They weren't getting what they wanted, and they eventually decided to go to Canada. And they went over to a spot which was very close to where the Detroit River empties into Lake Erie. And they stayed there for less than a year. They finally went to Fairfield, Ohio, or Fairfield, Ontario, which is very much near Thamesville. And if you go over there, it's very interesting. At Thamesville, they call Fairfield is where the settlement was there. They have a very nice museum. It's open. You can call over there or just drive over. It's only about 30 miles away from here, almost exactly due east. If you just draw a straight line due east 30 miles. And they have a lot of artifacts in this museum. And it's worthwhile. They have also the, you can see where the cabins were there. They put one cabin together and they got the foundations for the other cabin there. And they have a curator there that gives you a lot of stories about it. The only problem are the Moravians were out of luck again. This time, the war of 1812 came. And the occupation was of Detroit, and General Hall surrendered the fort, albeit the Americans found him guilty, wanted to have him, but he was not. And so General Harrison came up from Indiana with a lot of troops, and they chased the British out of Detroit, and they started chasing across Canada. General Proctor, who was in charge of the Canadian and the British forces, was retreating. He wanted to get back to Toronto area as best as he could. And he was going through the land, the trail right where the Moravian Fairfield village is. And so the British kindly said that this is where they were going to make a stand, right where the village was. So the Moravians said, here we go again, type of thing. And they pulled stick and they got other horses, scattered, and the American troops came up. They burned all their buildings again, and they had a big battle there. Quite a few hundred people were killed. It's called the Battle of the Thames. And if you go Google it up, the Battle of the Thames, this was where Tecumseh was killed. And if you go on this road, you'll see the monument to Tecumseh right outside of the Fairfield. Well, after the battle was over and the things settled down, the remaining Moravians said, well, we want to go back there again, so we liked it. So they went back and they rebuilt their cabins, but on the other side of the river, called Moravian Town. And I think we got a couple shots there in Moravian Town. This is right across from Fairfield, across the Thames River there. And they've been there ever since. And they have come over here on a regular basis, the Delaware Moravians. They still believe that the spirits of their ancestors are up where Nancy lives. And every now and then I get a call from somebody who wants to know what about them. We're concerned about all these Indians trying to get out of the car by their place. And we assure them that they're friendly, that they're not getting scalped or anything. And they like to come back there. And so we've had some dedications in the past for different things. They come over and they do some dances for us and so on. And they're very friendly. And some of them have come back to live in Macomb County. This is jobs and so on. So we actually have some of the Moravians that are probably in your neighborhood who doesn't even know about the Indians. But there is a contingent of them that are over in Moravian Town, which is the first Delaware Nation settlement. And they invite guests to come over. You can just drive over. They have every September they powwow and do the dances. Everybody's invited to go over there. Again, it's something that you can Google up and find out about. It's a short drive. But they're all relatives of ones, and they have a very close feeling to this area. My contact over there is Daryl Stonefish, and he's the librarian and the chief curator of the museum that they have there. Daryl keeps, we correspond email quite frequently. Call each other up. And Daryl would like very much to get more involved with the people here, and I'd like to create a better relationship with them because they like it here. I only created a little problem though, and I might choose to regret it sometime. I was talking to Daryl and just chit-chatting about all this, and I mentioned about the bones being found. He said, what happened to the bones? I said, oh, here it comes. Because now the laws changed and all these bones are supposed to be returned to the right people, the right tribes for reburial. And I don't know where we're going to go from here.
Who's to say whether those were European?
Well, the archaeologists, Nancy, that's an interesting question. The archaeologists, they can pretty much tell. Yeah, the skulls and the bones, particularly the shapes of the skulls and the tooth structure. So just like they can tell Slavic people from others and the Aryan people. But Nothing's come of it so far. I hope that we don't have to go through that one because they did the court cases and all that. That's the story of the Moravians with a bunch of rambling. And I hope it didn't bore you too much about the whole thing. You got it.
Indian historian, and I happened to stumble across one of your puzzles that I here. I was into making Indian moccasins.
Yeah.
So I got some books and found out that this fellow spelled moccasin M-O-X-O-N. So that's what that road is.
No, that was the name of a person.
Was it? Well, maybe they named it moccasin, but that was one of the ways he spelled it. M-O-X-O-N and M-O-X-E-N.
Didn't
Sigbert.
Mr. Moxon invented something, Don? What did Mr. Moxon invent, or?
Moxon's liniment. Liver and horses and men.
Oh,
And it seems to be made in Texas.
and I do know one Delaware that's still around here that I've talked to, and it's kind of funny because he's into the NRA and everything, and I'm going, well, that doesn't fit because they were pacifists, okay? And we figured out, well, after they came up here, they're going to be armed,
Yeah.
okay? So that's why he's armed.
Well, they are, yeah. They did a lot of hunting too.
His grandmother owned a little forest that's next to, it's off of Grossbeck, next to, yeah, his grandmother was Delaware.
Yes.
Now, Moravian Road, now we know where it starts at, right there at Cass Avenue. Where does it, I know where it ends now, but where did it end in those days?
It,
And what streets are now part of that?
okay, got Moravian Road on there?
Yes.
Okay. Moravian Road was built originally to go from the Indian settlement of Chihanabu. And it went down to Connors Creek in Detroit. Connors Creek is where the Detroit City Airport is. And there's actually Connors Road down there. There's a big pipe that takes the whole creek right down to the Detroit River. It used to be a creek that was there. There was a settlement back even as late as the 1920s. It was called Connors Creek. So the Connors Moravian Drive starts, used to originally start at where the settlement was up on Boxer Drive there, and went down to Shaner, goes right goes to Shaner, and then Shaner goes down to Gratiot. And what gets into Gratiot, that's where Connors Creek is. And now it's two separate roads, but still the same road. And the reason the road was built there, it's an interesting thing because it gets into a little bit of geology. That is all on top of a glacial moraine. That if you go on Metropolitan Highway and you're driving west on Metropolitan, say from Grossbeck going towards Moravian Drive, you're not conscious of it in a fast-going automobile thing, but you go slow and you look, and the road goes up like this. There's a definite rise of ground that goes there. And then you can follow that rise of ground all the way over to Shaner Road and further down. And that goes actually past where the Clinton River is. The Clinton River is part of that rise of ground. Goes through Mount Clemens, goes north of Mount Clemens, goes through. It's all part of what we call a glacial moraine. And they built, the Indians and the Moravians built the road on the high ground. So it was a lot safer than on the old marsh.
Well, that's like how they did the Natchez Trace. Right, the trace is between two rivers, a high spot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When you go to Moravian, you go to the northeast corner of Moravian Drive and 16 Mile, Metropolitan Parkway, and you see that sign there. It's the oldest inland road in the state of Michigan. The oldest, not the second, not the third, the oldest inland road in Michigan. And the Indians built that, and they chopped their way through. It's interesting reading the diary, and I noticed the change because every time they wanted to go to Detroit, when the Moravians were up here, they had to go out to the river, take the river down to Lake St. Clair, and then take Lake St. Clair all the way down to Detroit, by canoe. and they'd pick up what they had, and they'd come back again. And it was their way, the only way they could get here, they could not go. The forest was so thick, and the woods area so thick that there was no transportation going from their settlement down there.
Your attention, please.
So they cut the road.
We'll be closing in
Now they could go, and all of a sudden, the literature changes in the diary. They say, Brother Salisbury and another gentleman went to Detroit today on the road. So they weren't going by canoe anymore, they were going on the road.
You know, cemetery that you might consider burying your bones in is Millar.
Millar, yeah.
Because, see, that was originally an Indian cemetery. When they built next to there in 2001, I went through there and I did find human bones. I reburied them over in the thing with tobacco. Take their cycle.
Yeah, well, the Boy Scouts take care of our cemetery now.
Yeah. That's an old cemetery. That's one of the oldest ones in the area.
It's a family cemetery.
And I don't know if you know it, but the Indians always buried on high ground near where a river hit another river. Now the Red Run hits right there. And that's the highest ground.
It's a high ground there.
Right, and the same thing in Mount Clemens.
There's a hill right there.
Right.
Hold on, I think.
But it used to be Mount Clemens.
Well, it was nice to meet you.
Thank you.
We used to own a diamond place down in Mount Clemens, right?
Yeah.
My father-in-law knows who you are.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Is the town of Fredericks after,
What was that?
is the town of Fredericks
Oh,
in the same area
Frederick was a town that came after the Moravians left.
after the Rangers left?
Yeah. In fact, we have it. Do you still have the light on, Eva? You have that shot of Frederick, the cabin, that old broken down cabin there?
Which one?
Frederick?
The Frederick one?
When I read about the Moravians, I went over there on July 22nd when they arrived, and sure enough, there's a lot of mosquitoes. Oh, there are.
Cape Fredericks.
And then later on, they built the building, the brick one.
No,
It said Frederick on it.
Frederick was there, they built a lot of cabins there. Frederick was
They took over.
going to town one cabin. Challenged him on guns at that time. They had three grist mills, they had a general store, a hotel, and
Was it all in the low area?
most of it, but some of Nancy, we were talking about Frederick,
Yes.
almost as old as you.
Almost as old as me. What'd you say?
Yeah, Frederick, you remember, Richard had one of the old.
No, I used to, when I was a kid playing in the area, I found artifacts from Frederick. I never saw any buildings.
What kind of artifacts did you find?
I found a big metal spoon about this big. I found a broken child's teacup, a doll.
I collected some buildings and
A
stuff around.
rusted old candle mold, candle, had holes in it, candle mold.
The Indians were there for a long time, and also found a French lock. French lock. It's in a museum at the Freedom House. The upper house through the area. And it must